What is life? Why am I here? How is it all connected? And how am I going to navigate this beautiful but crazy journey? I'm Sylvia and welcome to the Soul Sunshine podcast. Today I'm talking to Mariane Power. Mariane is a psychologist as well as the co-founding director and head of corporate programs of the Posify Group. Over the past 15 years, she has been working with families as a therapist, researching what personal and environmental factors foster purpose and create impact, as well as provided executive coaching and training to entrepreneurs, educators, and industry leaders who want to leverage their human capabilities to help create a better world. Her work in the Posify Group entails making quality professional and personal development opportunities affordable and accessible to Gen Z, and to help inclusive leaders upgrade their own and their people's impact. Her big audacious goal is to see all unnecessary emotional pain and suffering eliminated within her lifetime, and she is obsessed with all the things related to human potential. What can I say? She's a busy woman, an incredible human, always with a huge infectious smile on her face, and I'm so excited to have her here with me today. Welcome to the Soul Sunshine podcast, Mariane. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, the fact that your podcast is called Soul Sunshine, how could I actually refuse the invitation? It's an absolute privilege and a pleasure. I'm very excited. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So before we are heading into our conversation today, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And Mariane, I think you're in Sydney today as well, so it's the same land,
actually.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, I am, and I must also give a shout out to our Birpai country and people up in Port Macquarie, which is our hometown, but I am in Sydney today. Yes.
Perfect, amazing, thank you. So today we are talking about purpose. You know, what is it and why is it so important? How can you find your purpose and how can you support your children in connecting to it? If we can create a world where more people live and breathe their purpose, what would that look like? We are talking about the satisfaction, but also the immense responsibility that comes with living your purpose. We are talking about the connection of purpose and impact and how we can support people to make this a beautiful journey so they can live a fulfilled life themselves as well as contribute positively to the collective. We are also asking some simple questions around leadership and how leaders are able to support their people on their purpose journey. So, Mariane, that was a huge intro today for you.
I'm curious when you said we're going to ask some simple questions about inclusive leadership. I'm thinking, oh, these will be interesting.
Well, I don't even know if you're going to be able to go there time-wise, but I'll put it there because in case
I reckon we can give it a shot.
We are able to get there, right?
Absolutely.
So Mariane, we met a couple of months ago at the beginning of the year at the Thriving Workplace conference that the Serenity Collective put on, and we didn't meet as much as I saw you presenting on stage about your work at the Posify Group, and I was just really inspired by what you were presenting and what you were telling us, and I just really wanted to connect with you, so I reached out to you via LinkedIn, Instagram, I can't remember. And yeah, we haven't made a coffee work yet, but I'm very happy that we're making this podcast work today, so that's very exciting.
I am too, and I'm holding us up for that walk along to Bronte Beach. That would be beautiful. And we'll do that after this podcast.
We'll make that
that was a great event, wasn't it? For me, it was
awesome.
just all about connection and people coming together and having the space and the time in just, you know, Sophie and Claire just do such an amazing job of choosing, I think, environments and the right tribe of people to come together and just imagine what the future can look like, and a future that's really led by good humans.
Yeah, totally.
Good impact.
And I think especially after 2 years of COVID, right, and many things being virtual, it was just such a nice vibe to reconnect with people in the room and see people talking and laughing and chatting and actually, you know, really remembering what it was like before, you know. It was because people are almost getting so accustomed to living and working in their little silos, and when they come together, it's suddenly like, oh my God, this is actually amazing. So
there's another human in the room.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
So So Mariane, to start the conversation today, I would love you to just tell us a little bit about your background and your story, just so that people that are listening get to know you a little bit better. And also, where did this desire and this excitement around purpose and impact start? When did you notice that was bubbling up in your life? Was that something that always was there with you, or that happened at a specific point in your life because of circumstances or whatever it may have been,
That's a really good question. I was one of those super duper annoying kids, depending on what your definition of annoying was. But for some teachers who don't quite like questions, I was annoying. I was always asking why. And actually, I'd say my sister probably, if you ask my parents, asked why a lot more than I did. But my whys were always around those big sort of existential questions of wanting to understand what we're doing here, what it's all for, where we're all going, what the purpose is, what's relevant, what's not relevant. And really just understanding, now that I look back on it, who humans are and how we behave in the world. So that threw me into pretty much every single co-curricular activity known to mankind as a kid, and just really grabbing life and getting to know all the different opportunities that exist. And I guess as I got older and was moving through the teen years, those why questions started to center a lot more around me observing a lot of my friends struggling with mental health at a time in Australia where mental health, and particularly amongst youth, wasn't really very well understood. So, in my immediate group of, say, 4 friends, I was the only one who wasn't dancing in and out of quite severe episodes of mental illness. I had friends in and out of hospital and having to undergo, really hectic treatment. And yet we'd come back to school and there wasn't a conversation because there wasn't a space or a place or a capacity or understanding of how to hold that conversation. So that was really confusing for me as a young person. I think looking back, I threw myself into acting and drama, which was my initial career before I went into psychology, as a way to just be able to put on a mask and explore other people's lived experience. But also, I guess the way I've retold that story to myself, because as you get older, you sort of think back and go, maybe I was doing it for that reason. I think probably to understand myself as well. I've had actually for the first time in my life, quite on trend at the moment, Sylvia, I've had a late diagnosis of ADHD. As an adult, so joining the club of women who are going, oh wow, there's this whole part of me and now everything's making sense. And so those who are familiar with that profile, we're very good at filtering and looking for patterns in other people and trying to join the dots on all of that. And so I think probably taking to the stage, that gave me space to really explore my own story and other people's stories, and to understand, to your point, what's this world all about? So fast forward a little bit, and yes, I did have a little bit of a dance with trauma, which made the exploration of purpose even more personally significant. And now as a psychologist, to understand that protective component that purpose can have in terms of moving not just through the clinical aspects of what we might call post-traumatic stress disorder or related symptoms, but through that from well into functioning and then into flourishing with what we call post-traumatic growth. And so for me, that was a lot of work around meaning making and sense making of the event that had happened and who I was as a person and what I could do with that newfound knowledge. And I was quite young at the time, only 19, so moving into my early 20s and then sort of exploring at acting school, what I wanted to do when I grew up, which I think I'm still probably trying to ask, was then introduced to the world of therapy myself, and also just wanting to connect with other people and understand what their take on life was. And, if these big, I guess, crises could happen, and having the experience where, the fragility of life was quite obvious to me, that coming back from that and coming back into the world and choosing to say, well, if I get a second chance and I'm still here, then I better give it a really good shot and surround myself with people who are doing the same. So fast forward into my early 20s, and we had our children quite young, my husband and I. They're now 14 and 17. And so I started kind of wondering about acting. I loved it. I still do. I love performing. I love storytelling. That's the kind of the drive for me behind. But I was working at the time producing for a little independent show called A View of Concrete that was all about drugs and the grungy side of Sydney and the stories that people can share along the way. And on my way to Belfast Street Theatre, I used to pass the Salvation Army's Oasis, which is a I guess at the time, I think it's still there, a hub for at-risk kids, and really like a salvation place where the kids could come and connect with other adults and have respite and learn and grow. And there was a particular kid who'd stand out the front every time I'd walk past with my coffee, and, you know, we'd smile for a couple of weeks. And finally I said, oh, you know, like, hi, I'm Maz, what's your name? And we got to talk. And I found out that he really wanted to get amongst the theatre, which was just up the road. And I said, well, you know, what's stopping you? And he said, oh, kids like me never get opportunities like that. Now, you give Maz a challenge like that, and I'm on fire. I'm like, right, kiddo, let's talk. So before I knew it, I'd introduced myself to the team at Oasis and I think I was pregnant with my second at the time, so I must have been in my mid-20s. And and it was involving myself in that group and getting to know all the kids, and partnered the kids at risk with the actors. And at the time I thought, you know, obviously this is going to be great for the kids. Everybody was saying what an opportunity, but I was also starting to wonder if actually this type of connection might be really meaningful for the actors and the stage production team that we were working with too. So without realizing it, I kind of embarked on my own little study of the impact of meaningful connection and purpose-driven work, and was measuring it without even knowing it. This was prior to going into psychology. So, you know, the impact of that work and seeing the real transformation. And when I say real transformation, I mean that particular kid I was talking about. I remember he called me one night and he was suicidal. And it was the first kind of, you know, oh, I'm either going to have to really switch gear here and take this seriously and go and get some real training, or say, see you later. And I'm pleased to say that, you know, he chose not to take his own life that day and stuck around and moved into pursuing theatre. And for the actors, you know, it really shaped and changed who they were and how they could relate to other people and what opportunities they would go and do. So that was really cool. So I went on to study counselling and psychotherapy first and foremost, with family therapy, and then into psychology until doing my honours project. Reached out to my sister and said, hey sis, this one-to-one model ain't going to work. How can we scale this stuff? And the Posify Group was formed about
Amazing.
5 years ago now. So it's been quite a journey. I hope that answers your question.
What a journey. Yeah, no, I love it. I mean, there was so much even just in that, you know. So in terms of what you were talking about as well, with bringing those kids together with the theatre people, I just loved it as well, because it's like two groups meeting that probably wouldn't ever have met, you know, and it's this being a little bit uncomfortable and engaging with somebody that you might not have had the conversation with, and then realizing, how you said, how much benefit there is from both sides, right, when you bring them together. And I think that can be related to other things in life as well. So I think that's a beautiful story that you were telling there as well. And going into the Posify Group, so you said you came out of studying psychology and you called up your sister. You were like, okay, we have to do something here, like this one-on-one thing is not going to cut it. And the Posify Group was born. So tell us a little bit about the work that you do at the Posify Group. I know you're working with children, working on the personal and professional development side for kids, but then also you work with leadership teams, entrepreneurs, etc. So tell us a little bit about what that involves.
Yeah, I mean, like every good startup story, it's really iterated. So we started out as, going to your point, to the kids. We really quickly realised that in order to prepare the kids for the future world and workforce, we probably needed to understand the workforce they were leading into. So to answer your question, we now take, through a series of programs, young people from the age of 10 and help them to uncover their identity, their purpose, and hold their hand as they're moving into the future of work. And so we do that by connecting the kids directly with industry for hands-on design sprints and programs that we scale as well.
And so when you're talking about purpose and like discovering purpose with kids, let's just go back to the very basics. You know, what is purpose? Like, how would you define it? And I guess, why is it so important, you know?
Oh, good question. I think it's kind of sound elusive, kind of. So depending on your think tank, if you like, philosophers will talk about it as a North Star and a guiding star, something that's intrinsically motivated. So different cultures have different sort of definitions, if you like, or relating. In psychology, we talk about purpose being a set of goals that are personally meaningful to the self, but that orientated towards making a difference to others or to the world. So if you take that definition, then really we can talk about something that's a small purpose, so making a small difference to the lives of others, whether that be by, infecting somebody with your smile on a daily basis. Or of course, then looking at that purpose of what is it, that combination of skills, strengths and values that I want to contribute to create big or small changes. I think it's a very multifaceted concept and it's very personally meaningful to others, and it's there. It's just about uncovering it within ourselves. But I think you've hit your purpose when what you're doing and where you're moving and where you're creating impact energizes you and motivates you and makes you feel like your life matters and that others matter too.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I really can relate to that, right? It gives you energy as soon as you do something that you feel purposeful about. You're like, you don't get tired. You can just keep going.
Yeah.
And people go like, why do you do this in the evening, at night? And you're like, I don't know. It's just because I love doing it,
Yeah.
That's what I always get with the podcast. People are like, how do you do that in the evenings when the kids are asleep and, editing at night? And I'm like, I don't know. I just do it because I love doing it. There is no question around it.
Yeah, and you've hit on a couple of things. I mean, purpose is what we call an intrinsic motivator. So extrinsic motivators are things like I'm going to do something because I'm rewarded by an external force like money, or somebody's going to give me time or reward. But an intrinsic motivator is something within that drives you. There's an engine within that drives you to get up and go and do that particular behavior. So that's why they talk about, jumping out of bed in the morning. Purpose is often, I guess, likened to that idea. So that's a really good point. There is, of course, the risk of obsessive purpose and, diving a little too much into something that makes you want to jump out of bed. And so there's a dark side and a flip side to everything in life. And I think purpose can play in that space as well. But yeah, once you uncover it and you know how to play with it, it's pretty fun.
I'm going to back this because I do want to go there a little bit later, the other side of purpose, because there is a lot of examples out there as well that are sad and not just happy examples, But before we go there, I would also, like when we're talking about purpose for children, and uncovering that purpose and helping them find that purpose. And we've talked about that a little bit in our pre-interview as well. But for me, I've got this belief that we are all here for a reason, that we are all born with a purpose. Like every single one of us is very unique, very individual, and we are all here for something specific, and we are born with that. And then I feel like with, growing up, you have parents telling you things, you have the school telling you things, there's lots of conditioning, lots of other beliefs that are coming in, lots of, life events that are happening. And I feel like through all of this, it's easy to lose your sense of purpose or to lose yourself a little bit and know what you actually want to do. Because if you ask a child, if you ask a 5-year-old, what do you want to do? They can tell you what they want to do, If you ask a 35-year-old, what are you actually really excited about? What do you want to do? A lot of them are like, I don't really know, a lot of them go to work for money or whatever it may be, And for me, that's really interesting because you lose that. And then at some point, there is this awakening of why am I actually here? What do I actually want to do with my time and my life? I feel like COVID and the pandemic was one of those times where people started to ask questions again because people were like, this cannot be it, And suddenly, their life was thrown upside down. And they came out the other side going what's actually happening? Why am I here? Why am I doing this job? I don't even like doing this job, But so to come to my point, it's so you've got your purpose, you're losing it, and then you're kind of trying to find it again. That's what my experience has been a lot in, my friendship group, etc. Also with myself, So I guess how can we help our children to not even lose that sense of purpose, to really remember who they are and keep going on that journey from a very young age without having to go through all this learning and unlearning. I mean, there's always a little bit of that along the way, obviously, but how can we really try and support them to go through that a little bit less unscattered as we might have gone through it,
It's a really good question. I mean, there's a few things that come up in mind from a developmental perspective with kids. I think we notice that at that age of 8 or 9, because you've got young kids as well yourself, don't you, Sylvia? Yeah. And so what happens is there's a shift from that sense of what we call that egocentric. So, the world is about me and I've got beginner's eyes and everything is new and exciting and I'm absorbing and I'm integrating and I'm learning. And then all of a sudden there's a shift developmentally with the change to the brain structure and that integration of identity into, well, it's not just me, but actually there are others, and other people's opinion matters. And I'm trying to incorporate that because now I've got a sense that I could be rejected. And I'm really simplifying this, but and so then that desire to want to fit in and to belong emerges, which is why with our early teens we then see that sense of, wanting to get into a group, like, who am I with and what do I identify as? That's a normal part of healthy belonging, exactly. And so to your point, how can we kind of prevent that loss? I don't know if it's preventable, but I do know that the research shows the more we can support the healthy development of personal development within our young people and give them language, so what we call wellbeing literacy, but also the space and the place to explore and play with the things that are naturally within their own strength capabilities, then the less likely they are to stray away from their innate motivators, and the more likely they are to lean in to the things that make them feel well and to do good. And that requires a lot of letting go, which I think culturally we're possibly not so great at. At least, with our generation growing up, it was all about, well, you're supposed to do this and you're supposed to do that. And this is a pathway, it's very linear. And, this next generation's, I'm excited because they're disrupting that. But we need to bring back mentorship and the role of exploration and play, and maybe not just take ourselves so seriously with this stuff. It requires that coaching and that support around a young person and the hand holding. It requires being able to take risks and reassess them and, look at what went well and what could be done differently moving forward, and how did that behaviour map to your values? What are your values? Can you name them? What do they mean to you? Why do they matter? Not just within yourself, but within your family, your community, your school, and out in the world. I think personal development is going to play a huge role as we move into the future. And I think we're beginning to recognise that more and more and more.
Yeah. And what are some of the practical things when you're talking about, giving kids the language and well-being literacy and, other tools? Like, what is something practical that you can share with us that you would recommend doing? When you're talking about the linear process as well, what comes up for me, it's like, I very much grew up in a family where my parents always thought that they knew better. They still do,
Yeah.
It's like we know what the right thing is. While when we're looking at our children now, I feel like there is this kind of give and take, It's like I teach you, but you teach me just as much as I teach you in reverse. And there is this real holding space for the younger generation to really explore themselves and be themselves and, do the things that they're passionate about. And yes, sometimes as a parent, that is really difficult, and it's sometimes challenging to let go because, yes, a lot of the time you do feel like you might know better, but you don't necessarily, and sometimes it is this, like you said, just chill out and let go and, pick your battles kind of thing. Not everything has to be won.
Yeah. And I've got particularly curious kids, so the picking the battles is personally significant in our place.
Yeah. I've got that as well.
But I definitely think we've seen a shift from command and control style of parenting towards a more compassionate, strengths focused. And look, I don't want to say that and just say, hands off the wheel. There's a real role parents need to play in safeguarding and providing very clear boundaries and developmentally appropriate risk-taking opportunities. So it's certainly not a case, from my perspective at least, of out you go kids and I'll see you again at 6 o'clock tonight. Figure it out for yourselves. At all. There's a lot that these kids have to navigate. And I think, there's a real place for firm and fair boundaries around things like digital use, like such an unregulated industry in terms of these little supercomputers our kids have got. So I don't want anybody to sort of take away from this message. Matt says just, chill out. But to your question of practical stuff, so I really love the work of Lee Waters. She's done a lot of work around bringing strengths-based parenting to the table and why focusing on strengths and helping your child to identify strengths but also play to those strengths can be really protective. I like that her approach is super practical. So in terms of conversation starters, in terms of the role parents can play in understanding their own strengths too. And the reason I like strengths is that because we can come back to them at any point in time and they're intrinsically motivated as well. So we feel good when we use our strengths. It's protective for our well-being. It's protective for our physical health. We do better. We're more productive. And so I think, just if you haven't already, check out viacharacter.org.
I have to, yeah. I haven't heard of her, yeah.
So Lee Waters has sort of taken the strengths work of two positive psychology psychologists, Martin Seligman and Christopher Peterson, who came up with character strengths. So the vicharacter.org website is where you can go and you can see the free surveys there for adults and for children, for youth, and integrating that language into the family. To your point, curiosity. So rather than making assumptions about your child, asking questions. I think one of the things that I see works so well with families is when there's a place and the space to take, for example, a behaviour that maybe wasn't so great or an outcome that didn't work really well, and sit together and uncover, what was the function, what was going on behind that, what was the motivation, what can you share with me? If we give space for kids to safely share with us what's going on in their world without the sense of doom and gloom consequence, we get to know them as humans and we get to know the ecosystem that they're growing up in. I don't meet that many kids who intentionally want to go out and annoy their parents or the world. Most of the behaviour that parents are like, oh, I wish the kid wouldn't do that, is because they've gotten caught up in a situation where their skills and their understanding of the dangers isn't matched and there's an incongruence there. And so it's our job, I think, as parents and as teachers and as just adults to provide that mentorship and space, asking questions, being curious, being compassionate and removing judgment where you can, and then safeguarding, having boundaries. I think there's a real role for that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I've done it before as well. And it's like sitting down with your children and just asking them questions. You just hear their side of the story, right? Because you always have to think, like, if they're acting out, there is a reason behind
there
it.
Is.
Like, what is the reason?
What is the reason? What's going on? Yeah. Exactly. And to that point, I think as well, emotional regulation work.
Yeah.
And I talk a lot about neurodivergence because personally it impacts our family. So both of my kids are ADHD and autistic and gifted, so what we call twice exceptional. So we've had to do a lot of work in our family around emotional regulation, particularly when they were younger, and learning as parents that for these particular kids, they do what we call co-regulating. So they rely very heavily on us as parents to be calm and stable and still and available to regulate their sensitive systems. Not so great when mum is also ADHD, by the way, but mum's learning. Thank goodness mum's got lots of psychology friends to dip and dive into. But I think we can learn a lot from the neurodivergent population and apply that to the neurotypical population as well. So regardless of how your brain works, understanding that your child is developing, the role of modelling is, I think, really undervalued in our society. And so as a parent and an adult, teacher, wherever you come at into a young person's lives, one of the most impactful things you can do is learn to regulate your own emotions so that when you come into a conversation with a young person, and this applies to leadership as well, when you come into a conversation with another person, you're coming in from that leveled, emotionally stable point where you can actually use your thinking brain and you can act to co-regulate the other person who may or may not be at that particular point in time for lots of different reasons thinking straight because their emotion brain switched on. So doing your own work around that is so important.
Yeah.
And never too late to start, by the way.
Yeah.
Like for anybody who's listening to this going, oh, I should have done this, I've ruined my children's lives. You haven't. It's never too late to start. And also being open with your kids that, hey, I don't have the answers, but let's figure it out together. Like let's ditch this idea that we're all perfect and experts, because none of us are. We're all fumbling and COVID hasn't taught us that we're all fumbling and figuring this life out as we go. Then I'm not sure what else has taught us.
Everyone's trying their best, right? And it's like, when you talk about this, if you would go to a child that's already upset and you just punish them, it's like you're just layering another emotion on top of what they're already experiencing. So there's like that safe space as well that kids need, and they need to know that they've done something wrong, but that they're still loved. So what I, for example, do with my 6-year-old, always when he does something, I said to him, Max, I really love you, but it's behavior that I just can't accept, and I explain it to him and I talk to him about why this is and what the outcomes from it are. And he seems to be really getting that. And to your second point as well, in terms of, it's never too late to start. And you can just say to your child, look, I have just not been feeling good today, and I'm sorry, I was a bit grumpy, or, I know that I wasn't behaving like in the right way either. And children understand, like they are smart little cookies. They go like, that's okay, I know. And, they do get us, and they are okay with it because they have it as well. They know what it's like, But it's almost like you said, we feel like we have to always have it all together for the kids. But I think it's more important to teach them that life is not always just perfect and going well, but that to teach them how to actually deal with conflict and, things that are upsetting and things that are not going our way, because that's the thing that then teaches resilience and how you actually work through those things.
Those restorative conversations are really important too. I think we can do a lot as parents. To go back to your point around, the yelling and the screaming, and I know in the heat of the moment that is so tempting. But
we've all done it. I have.
Hello, like on a daily basis. No, but I think there is a lot of, for anybody listening who's like, well, how do I get around that? There's a lot of value in the gap and the space. And actually naming out loud, so name it to tame it in the moment in families is, I'm feeling really frustrated right now. I need to step away from this conversation and gather myself, because otherwise I'm worried I'm going to say it or do something that I'll regret. So learning a lot about how the brain works under the emotional states, as Dan Siegel's work is awesome. He talks about flipping the lid. And we know from research now and neuroscience that when we're yelling at a child or at another person, what we're doing is activating their fight or flight responsive systems. And so we're not going to achieve what we want to achieve, which is that corrective behavior, because our other person that we're in that relationship with is operating out of a do or die brain. So there's no learning, there's no reflecting, there's no changing. It's just, I'm going to take my stand and I'm going to take my stand, and we're going to lock heads. And before you know it, the argument that started over a spilt cup of milk has all of a sudden escalated into World War III, and you're so far removed from whatever the problem was in the first place that you can't connect as humans and resolve. So really learning what it looks like to manage your own stress level. So in the Posify Academy, for example, we've got a particular lesson in there that looks at the worry barometer, and we've borrowed that from the zones of regulation work for anybody who's listening. So the zones of regulation are fantastic because it gives that common language, so that earlier point of, our wellbeing literacy, of being able to say, I'm in the red zone. Like when I'm in the red zone, ain't no point talking to me about any kind of change. I need to breathe. I need to bring myself down. I need to regulate. In the green zone, I'm feeling comfortable and confident. And this is where I'm curious and I can have a conversation and I can make some change. So learning to kind of help each other in a family system of where am I at, where are you at, and where do we need to get to be able to get where we want to get, I think is very impactful.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, there's so much there as well, but I do want to bring it back to the purpose conversation now. But
by the way, this all feeds into purpose, right?
No, I know it does. But so in terms of when we're looking at purpose for children and then purpose for adults, so it's obviously really important for us to live our purpose, to teach them. It's like teaching by doing, teaching by showing. But so how much are systems these days set up for really allowing people to come in with their full purpose? When you work in the leadership space with leaders, like how much acceptance is there actually for that, and approval, or how much do leaders want to have people fit into specific roles based on what they need rather than what they bring to the table? Do you see change there in terms of being more flexible, or how do you perceive
100%.
that?
And I think people are, they're voting with their feet. So there's a lot of talk about the great resignation right now, but I think there's, on the positive flip side of that, the great enlightenment. We're moving through COVID. Again, it is that exposure to existential questions of, well, what are we all here for? My life could get taken away, or somebody I love at any point in time. Whether that be a real or perceived threat, it was something that we were all considering and was very much visible, highly, globally. And so you've got people moving back into the workforce that are saying, well, if I'm going to sit at a desk or contribute to a company, then it's going to have to matter. And so what we're noticing, and for Gen Z, this is very significant. So they will take a 33% pay cut if it means that they can work for an organisation that stands for good. and that they can explore their own personal and professional development, and that that's mapped to purpose. So meaningful work, I think, is here to stay. And so I think companies who are leading the way in that are doing better at attracting, engaging, and then retaining their people. So a lot of the work that we're doing in organizations is helping to bring that authenticity piece to, it's not just talking about purpose and, you know, these big sort of shiny value statements and where we're wanting to go in the world, but actually how can you put that into action in a way that's really tangible for people? Because unless until your people have got that lived experience of seeing and noticing and being involved in the impact they're creating, then they haven't got that motivating factor of recognizing why they matter and why the work they're doing matters. A good friend, Zach Mercurio, does really brilliant work in this space. I've had the privilege and the pleasure of interviewing him a few times. So if you haven't already, read his book. We'll throw it in the show notes for you. And actually, there's a few I'll point your readers to. We'll pop together a little list.
Yeah, we'll put them all together in the podcast.
But to answer your question specifically, it's more important now than ever.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling like you can't even get away without it anymore, right? Like, what are you doing if you're not doing it?
And people are just leaving.
Accepting that.
Yeah, they're just leaving. Yeah. You know, I mean, every day I was watching last night on the ABC, actually, Four Corners was doing a report on how challenging it is to get people into the workforce. And the biggest competitive edge that a company can do right now is to stand for something and to really move away from creating value, not just for profit, of course that's important, but to create value and solutions for our world and the people who are on it.
Yeah, and I mean, from experience as well, once you've worked in the purpose-driven space, you know, doing something that you love, doing something that has meaning, that creates impact, I think it's so hard to go back, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, you wouldn't want to go back. It's like you said, you rather take the pay cut or whatever it takes, you know, but it's really hard to go away from that positive space again, you know, and go into something meaningless potentially.
Yeah.
So it's really good to see that the next generations coming up are really getting that quite early as well, you know. I guess that's a question for you, you know. What does success mean for the younger generation coming up, you know?
Yeah, we get asked this a lot. I mean, earlier on when I first started getting interested in purpose and its role in positive youth development, you know, great researchers, Damon and Bronk, and again, I can give you some references to their papers, were looking at the lower numbers of purpose being articulated by young people. And I can only say this anecdotally, but we're noticing a really seismic shift. And I think it's because every single generation, you know, our teenagers have always led the way on these big challenges. You know, they can see the injustices in the world and they want people to take action. But now, you know, we're looking at a generation, one of the first ones, who have had access to, you know, these things, their mobile phones. And what's on a mobile phone? The entire world. Everything, right? And so there's a responsibility that they see, and I think probably a burden of, oh my gosh, there's so much that just needs to happen.
It's all the good and all the bad.
It's all the good and all the bad. And, you know, from the good perspective, they've also got a vehicle where they can have a voice and where they can take real action and create real change. So I would say that over the, you know, the sort of 10 years, 15 years I've been working in this space, at least anecdotally, I'm seeing a real shift in kids who are able to articulate the things that they stand for rather than using that word of purpose, which can sound a little bit intense. You know, we ask instead, you know, what is it that you stand for? Or what is it that you want to create change? You know, what is it that matters to you? What irks you? What excites you? You know, what's the perfect planet in your mind? You know, what could we live without? What could we do more of? And then all of a sudden this big elusive idea of purpose. And when you ask kids that question, they can answer it every time. And so helping them to find pathways to play with that and to create little tiny ripples of change and then to measure that. And when I say measure, I don't mean like sit in a science lab, although that's important too, but to actually follow up and say, you know, I did this and what was the impact of that and who can I see changed or pivoted or did something else. That's really important feedback for a young person to be getting.
Yeah, totally. So that they can move on to the next step as well in their journey, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in terms of the purpose then within organizations and, you know, we're having worked in the purpose-driven sector for like the past 10 years as well. I want to come back to what we said really early on in our conversation around, you know, there is the positive side about purpose-driven work, but there is also that shadow side of purpose-driven work, you know. A lot of the time I feel like because people are working for positive impact and they are working to actually create positive change in the world, there is a lot of the time a huge burden that comes with the responsibility, you know. And what would you say to people around that, you know? Because I always find like if it goes to that point that it becomes a burden and then overarching responsibility that leaves you in burnout or worse, you know. We've had friends take their own lives, you know, because they couldn't even handle that burden anymore of, you know, making that change. So like, what would you say to people that are in that space, you know, that feel like, oh, this is just so big, you know, like this is just overwhelming, but it's important and it's necessary and it needs to be done, but at the same time it feels heavy, you know?
Yeah. Oh, can I just say that first and foremost, you gave me tingles, and I'm so sorry to hear that that's your personal experience. Yeah, I think burnout and we see this a lot in charities and not-for-profits, and, you know, those spaces tend to attract and also support healing work. So I'm thinking as well of our teachers and our doctors and our nurses and, you know, those traditional healers. But yeah, I think when you're okay, first of all, let me say not for everybody does purpose and their work intersect, right? And so some people find that they can go to work and do functional tasks and their purpose sits outside of their workplace. So I just want to separate those two things. For people who bring their purpose or a sense of what really matters to them and a shift or a change that they want to see into every aspect of their day, their work, their families, their lives, I think perspective is a really important piece. What I see is over time, people are slow to change, systems are slow to change, the world is slow to change. The bigger your vision for that change is, the higher the risk of burnout and frustration and cynicism. And I see that a lot when I'm coaching entrepreneurs in particular who are within the purpose space and startup founders. The stress that can come with having an inner desire and to see the potential, and yet the slow churn of what that change looks like, I think can carry a toll. So, you know, what can protect against that is having purpose-free time. You know, is to approaching purpose with a sense of play, approaching it with a sense of perspective, that I am one piece in a huge puzzle, looking at historic figures who have worked towards a purpose in the past and where they got to and who picked up, what was their legacy, what was the bigger piece. I think you can't talk about purpose and meaning and mattering without getting spiritual, right? And so if the point of being here is to contribute something so that the next generation can do their next piece, which can do their next piece, which somehow fits into the idea that we are all connected to something that's bigger than ourselves, which is the fundamental core and aspect of working towards a goal that's beyond yourself, then doing the work to understand who you are as a human, but what that human experience within a soul form is having, and whatever that means to you, I think is really important, because purpose lives beyond us. And that's why we talk about legacies. And so getting really clear on what's achievable, what's fantastical, you know, what's big, hairy and audacious, is still worth putting forward as a, you know, like, look at my purpose to end all unnecessary human suffering. Like, if I genuinely, realistically thought I was going to be able to achieve that by the time I died at a practical human level, I'm not sure I'd get up out of bed every day. But when I set that as my big, hairy, audacious goal, because I can seriously see that we could, if we just all bandied together and scaled what we know works, get curious with one another, then yes, removing unnecessary suffering is possible, right? And so getting really clear on what your drivers are, what your blocks are, who are your humans that you can surround yourself with, you know, who's in your tribe, to have those conversations. I'm getting really stuck. I'm getting really frustrated. I feel like I'm not moving the needle. That's been so powerful for Jenna and I, to be able to have a community that can reflect back and say, hang on a second, look at what you achieved in this space of time. You know, we always think that we can achieve more than we actually can. Yeah. And having other people feed back to us to correct some of that unhelpful thinking that can eat away at that sense of, I'm not doing enough, I should be doing more, I think can be really, really powerful and helpful as well.
Yeah, and just being grateful for the things that you have achieved, right?
Yeah,
and seeing
yeah,
it
and
rather
being
than
kind to
looking for the
ourselves.
next thing.
Yes, yeah,
I think that's a
self-compassion.
very human thing, isn't it?
Yes,
It's like
yeah.
you kind of forget what you've already done because there's always something bigger, better to achieve or do or whatever it may be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I really lean in on Kristen Neff's work around self-compassion and learning to speak kindly to myself like I would to somebody else, and to have a look at that perspective and to recognize those moments of hardship or suffering and respond to myself with kindness. And sometimes that kindness means putting in firm boundaries. So she talks about fierce compassion and then also, that kind compassion as well. So the yin and the yang, or the male and the feminine energies. For any of your listeners, I think if you haven't already taken a dive into her work, I really encourage you to do so. Fill your own toolkit up and fill your own bucket up, and recognize that in order to do good in the world, you first and foremost have to look after yourself.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. It's got to be fun.
Well, you can't do anything else.
That's
right. That's the thing.
Yep. So self-care and having fun. Just having fun. It's meant to be fun. We're meant to be playing.
Yeah, no, I love that, because it's like one of those things. It's like, no, but I have to do this and I have to do that, and then you forget about yourself, and then you end up in bed sick or something. You can't do anything, and then well, nothing's happening, So it's always, the better you look after yourself and your own physical and mental health, the more you can support others and the more you can actually contribute to the bigger good, right? But you were saying something really interesting in that last bit as well, when you were talking about, purpose being connected to the spiritual side, because that's the thing that came up for me as well, in terms of, how important is it for us as individuals to live our own purpose out, no matter if like within work or like somewhere, in life. And I think that's another really good point that you said. It doesn't have to be necessarily with work, as long as you have something that you're really excited and passionate about, But how important is it in order to contribute to the greater good, to the bigger collective energy, and how important is it for that healing to happen in that space as well, in order for us to really, create the beautiful life for ourselves as well as for all the people around us.
Yeah, and so is the question, how important or how relevant is spirituality in terms of being healthy humans?
The question is more around how important is it that we live our most authentic and beautiful lives, in order to create that ripple effect into the greater collective energy and into the greater collective field. Because the more we are ourselves, and the more we can be, the more we are ourselves and living our purpose and our soul journey, the more positive energy we can put out into the world, which then goes into the greater collective energy field, Because the more negativity we send out, there's already a lot out there, So if we can try and make it positive for us, but then it's not just for us, it's the ripple effect that goes through your family, your work, your colleagues, and out into the world, And I think understanding that it's not just about you, it's like you're doing it for yourself potentially, initially, but then it's actually, it's so much bigger than that.
It is, yeah. And it's interesting because I'm getting more comfortable with this, but in psychology, we were very much trained that, you stick in your lane of science, and spirituality, ironically, is never talked about, which is so hilarious, because we know one of the most protective factors for people, particularly when they're clinically unwell, is to be able to connect with something that is larger than with themselves, their belief systems, whether that be religious, whatever it is. But spirituality is so important. And we also know from science, the quantum physics space around outside of the human experience, when we look at the world, what energy does. That's why we have lights. That's why we have sound. There is so much that we can't necessarily measure that we still know to be true. And for those listening who really just need that sort of black and white explanation, all you need to do is look at emotion contagion and the neuroscience around when you smile, what that does to my mirror neurons and what that does to my mood and my affect. And so if you can afford yourself some space and imagination to play outside of that direct example and imagine, well, if my positive emotion and if emotion contagion exists, what other role could those energy vibes, if you like, or if you don't want to be so woo-woo, those simple behaviors, what could they be shifting and shaping? You know, when I walk past I did it just today, walking down before I got to this interview, I went got myself a coffee and I was walking down and there's a little girl and she picked a flower up out of the ground and she picked it up and she looked at it and she looked at me and I smiled and she smiled and she looked up at her mum and so her mum smiled. Now, imagine that little moment and then, you know, the next effect of the next interaction, the next interaction, the next interaction. To your point, it's like dominoes, right? We're all interconnected. The human species is not that damn special, that we're not driven by the same moves that shift the oceans and mean that the moon cycles around and the sun comes up every day. We're just not that special. We need to get over ourselves and start connecting.
Start connecting with each other. Yeah. So how can people that are out there that feel a little bit worried about maybe not living their purpose to the full extent or maybe not having found their purpose yet, what would you recommend to them? You know, what would you say is important for them to look at, or how can they kind of take baby steps in order to find what really sparks joy and excites them again?
I think you just gave the secret at the end. Get curious. You did. Get curious about what brings you joy and what excites you and what irritates you. You know, what do you wish you could change if you could wave a magic wand? We like to ask lots of fantastical questions that remove sort of logic and remove rationale and, you know, that kind of thinking, and just, you know, if you could wave a magic wand and the world looked different tomorrow, what would that be? And what's a small step that you can take to make a small change? So interestingly, we ran some research actually, and I'll share this with you afterwards, around what we called an impact mindset. And we found 4 different types. And this, you know, builds on the work of benefit mindset too, but there was no impact. So I just can't see that I'm going to do anything at all. And sometimes people play in that space. Then there was local impact. I can see that I can do something small that is purposeful and meaningful each day. And that might be that I prepare a wholesome meal for my children, and that purpose is that we take from the ground with gratitude and we give to feed and fuel ourselves. That's purpose, right? Then we found that there was global impact mindset. So when I say global, not just like international change, but how can I take that small act of service and take it to scale? And then we found that some people do both. They've got a local and a global impact mindset. So really recognizing that depending on what resources you've got available to you and what's going on in your life, it's so normal to be more purpose-focused or driven, and then have seasons where it just does feel a little bit more day to day. You know, our life here is kind of complex, and it's okay if we're not so deep and meaningful and thoughtful all of the time in a structured way. I think leaning into purpose is more about accepting a sense of curiosity and play and finding joy and looking for opportunities, small and big, to be of service to others.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Ness, thank you so much. I know you have to go in an hour, so I thought
I could talk to you for ages.
I know, I could keep talking as well. I've got so many things in my head. But no, it was such a beautiful conversation with you. I think we've covered so many different aspects, you know, looking at children, looking at adults, looking at leadership, like how is it all connected, looking at the bigger collective, you know. So there's a lot in there. So thank you so much for being here today and providing us with all your wisdom and with your knowledge. And I know there's so much there. We might have to do another episode at some point where we really deep dive into one of the elements. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And to that point about wisdom, gosh, that feels funny hearing that. I sort of like to think of myself as somebody who shares all the wisdom from others. You know, I just want to give space and thanks and gratitude to the giants who have shared their thinking that helps to shape my thinking and others. And to your listeners, you know, I'd love to share with you some of our resources if they're just wanting some practical ways to start asking these questions. You know, we've got our impact framework that we take into workplaces. So I'll send you over some links if you like to pop them in the show notes.
Before I go to the show notes, there was so much amazing information in our conversation today, Mass, but the 3 main pearls of wisdom that I'm taking away from today is that, you know, purpose doesn't necessarily have to intersect with your job. I think there can be a lot of pressure out there, for people. That's, oh my God, like I don't feel like my job's my purpose, etc. But what you said really stuck with me, because it's like it doesn't necessarily have to be a job. It can be something that you do in your free time that just really excites you, brings you joy, makes you laugh, and that's fine. You don't have to do it like 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
The second thing that came up for me as well was to always approach purpose with a sense of play. Always give yourself a bit of time off as well. Take a time of purpose, play, and just don't take it so seriously, because it can be overwhelming if you're working, to create impact. It can be a lot of pressure as well. So just approach it with a sense of play and give yourself a little bit of space around that as well. And then the last thing that I really loved when you were talking about purpose, intrinsic motivators versus extrinsic motivators. The intrinsic motivators being the things that really drive you, and the things that you do because you really want to do them and they feel right and they just make you smile. And then extrinsic motivators being things like, money and fame or whatever it may be, And so following those intrinsic motivators, and seeing what is it that I actually really want to do that just makes me want to jump out of bed in the morning, I think that is a very good thing to think about as well, as you're like looking at what you are engaging in with your time, I guess. So they are my 3 pieces of wisdom from our episode today. Like I said, there was so much more in there, so I hope everybody listened to the whole episode, because I'm not doing it justice to summarize the whole episode in here. So Maz, tell us, if people want to find you, like where can they do that? What's the best way to connect with you? If people want to get in touch with you, or if people want to get more information about the work that you do within, individuals, leadership, teams, etc.
Yeah, so personally, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me at Mariane Power. That's probably the place that intersects all of the work. The Posify Group you can find online, so www.theposifygroup.com.au, so POSIFY group.com.au. Sign up for newsletters. We're constantly doing new things. The Academy platform is free for young families, so that's another one, academy.theposifygroup.com.au, and all over social media at Posify Group. We're getting better at posting more regularly.
But it's a whole other job,
social media, that's a whole other job. Yeah,
Fabulous.
Absolutely. But yeah, if you find me on LinkedIn, Mariane Power, just reach out, send a message. It's just me. So
amazing.
I'd love to have a conversation.
Thank you. And like we said before, we'll put a bit of a list together of all the books and people that you've talked about in terms of resources, and where you can get some more information around the topics that you've talked about today as well, for people that really want to deep dive into specific topics. I think that's really helpful.
Sounds great.
Amazing.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here.
You're
it was
welcome.
An absolute pleasure. I'm so happy we made it happen.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. I really hope you got something out of this episode today. It might have inspired you to really, look at your life and see, where am I living a purposeful life? Where can I potentially still change a few things or amend a few things to make it even more fulfilling, and where can you bring in little pieces of purpose into your everyday life? If you are not able to do it in your work, where else are you able to do it, or can you even bring it into work, Maybe it's just ask yourself that question and see what can happen. Please do share the podcast with your family, with your friends, or anyone you think might benefit from this information. I really hope this episode brought some sunshine to your soul. I'm sending love and light your way, and until next time.